So we're here to talk through this Battleships puzzle. Battleships is a genre where a lot of people, I think honestly, just go through a guessing approach where they start from the largest ship and work their way down. And that will certainly work in a puzzle like this, but this was crafted to have a much more elegant logical path, maybe a less usual logical path, but something worth going through. So I wanted to talk through the kinds of steps that can help you unlock a puzzle like this. There are a few things to notice at the start. The first is, and this is a less typical case than usual, but you actually have 3 of the 4 submarines given to you, which means there's only one small ship left and the rest are larger ships that are left to be placed. This submarine clears its row and its column, and as a result divides the grid in 4. This large section in the lower right is probably where most of the ships are going to sit, and then these smaller groups don't have too much to take. But it's critical to spot that there are 3 ship segments left to place in the top 2 rows, and 3 ship segments left to place in the left 2 columns. And it's not the case that those 3 can belong to a cruiser, a 3-unit cruiser, because there's no way to get these cells to split 1 and 2. So this is a submarine, the last submarine, and a destroyer. This is a submarine and a destroyer, and we have 1 submarine left, so where do these indicated clues sit? They have to sit in this joined space. So there is a submarine up there. That means that there is a destroyer somewhere in this space and a destroyer somewhere in that space. And so let's think about how the destroyer can sit, and let's start by focusing on these 2 columns. The destroyer can be vertical in the 2nd column, or the destroyer can sit across the 1st and 2nd columns in a row, but it can't do that, for instance, in this row that has 1 cell left to take. It can't do it in a place like this. It also can't use this cell, and so at least these as a starting point are places, and I can even mark that off. These are cells we can eliminate as potential Cs. Sorry, potential ships. We can mark them as Cs right at the beginning. And there's similar kind of logic and work up here. The destroyer is going to sit horizontally in the 2nd row, or span the 1st and 2nd rows going vertically, but it couldn't use this cell. With a count of 1, it can't use this cell. With this C here, it can't use that. With that C here, it can't use that. So little creative ways to mark off these cells, but that we've sort of divided the grid and identified some ships we're using helps out there. The most critical cell we marked off was this one, and the reason is it now places a requirement that 2 ship segments get used over here. Now, what people don't often recognize is how, when you have a requirement, for instance, 2 of these 3 are used, it really affects the adjacent space. For instance, if any of these cells in this space are used, you can't take the middle cell. You could have a vertical and a vertical, ignoring these clues. That using 2 out of 3 here prevents you, for instance, from using this cell. If you use this cell, it eliminates 2 diagonal cells at the same time. So the first thing we can say when we have 2 out of 3 being used is that a cell that sees 2 of those 3 diagonally can't be potentially filled by a ship. And now we actually have column clues that help us a lot here. It's not always the case you're going to get both being 1s, but when we have a 1 that sits near a cell that we know must contain a ship, well, we can't take both of these, and if we use this, it cancels that. Using this space cancels 2 ship spots. That's no good. Simply using that space cancels 2 ship spots, and that's no good. So what we've actually done is marked off that there is going to be a horizontal destroyer, the last destroyer here, and this is the last space in this row to fill. So what we actually have left are just 3 and 4 unit ships for this lower right region. We've actually filled in all of that column. We can propagate that information over to here. And so now we get to sort of an end game where honestly we've placed all the small ships first and we just have the big ships to go. So let's think about logically what we need to do from here. The first is we can take the active count of these columns, this being a 1, 1, 1, knowing that a ship is going to sit here. We need to have a horizontal ship that starts in this cell and goes across. It can't start in a row of just one because it has to be at least 3 long. It can't start in a row of 2. It has to be at least 3 long. So this is one of the big ships. We'll mark the cells that can't touch immediately above as well as this one diagonally. Never forget the diagonal cancellations. We've actually marked off enough to fill those columns. This destroyer is just left with that space to sit. That cancels down. This destroyer is left with just that space to sit. We now have 3 cells left to fill in this column, so there's only one place potentially for the battleship, that's here. That cruiser is forced, marking off the cells that are used. The last cruiser is forced, and so here we actually got through a battleships puzzle not from starting from the largest ships and working down, but really thinking about the geometry of placements and particularly getting the subs and destroyers fit. And critical set of thinking in this 4th and 5th row about how to get 2 cells used over here without having conflicts in the row just below it. And it's kind of that paired row thinking that gets through most battleships puzzles logically. Not everyone can do it well, but it's a neat skill to learn, and it makes puzzles like this really fun because you'll crack some things you wouldn't expect to do by logic. So I hope you learned something about battleships from this talk through, and we'll see you again.